3, 2, 1.
Let's go.
Arcade Exclusives.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Arcade Exclusives, where we look at some of the arcade-only titles from a particular company. Today it's Irem, most famous for its successful R-Type series of horizontal shooters. Irem released arcade games between 1978 and 1994, but really made a name for themselves in the 80s. Their most influential titles from this era are arguably 1982's Moon Patrol, 1985's Kung Fu Master, 1987's R-Type, and 1988's Vigilante. My personal favourites of their arcade games that did receive home ports are Vertical Shooter Image Fight from 1988, Horizontal Dragon Riding Shooter from 1989 Dragon Breed, 1992's side-scrolling beat-em-up Undercover Cops, and 1993's Metal Slug lookalike submarine shooter In the Hunt. Today I'm joined by Mega Dru, a huge arcade fan, so go over and check out his channel, which is linked below in the description. So without further ado, let's look at 9 of the Irem games that never left the arcades, and I'll hand you over to Mega Dru to kick off.
Hello everyone, it's Mega Dru here, and I'll be Pete's co-presenter for this exciting On a Retro Tip episode. Now for those of you familiar with my channel, you'll know how much I love arcade games. So when Pete asked me to guest on an episode about Irem games that were left in the arcade, I jumped at the chance. So, for my first game, let's fly back to 1990 with Air Duel. Air Duel was a vertical scrolling shoot-em-up that arrived in arcades in 1990. Powered by Irem's M72 system board, Air Duel puts players in control of a helicopter or plane with the option to switch after each level. The setting is the end of the last century. After a disaster hits Earth, an evil organisation set out to achieve global domination. You take to the skies in your chosen vehicle and fly through 7 stages. Enemies mainly consist of various types of aircraft, tanks, and of course end-of-level bosses. Graphically, things are neither impressive or poor, and like most elements of the game, they sit somewhere in the middle. The same can be said about the music and sound effects. There is just nothing memorable, and it all sounds just okay. Air Duel doesn't really add a great deal to the genre, taking its inspiration from the likes of 1942, but not really building on it. For a shoot-em-up that was released in 1990, it was fairly mediocre, and we had already seen far better from Irem by the time this was released. If you're a fan of the genre, by all means give it a playthrough if you get a chance. Just don't expect too much from this offering.
The Battle Road from 1984 is a top-down vehicular combat game, which for all intents and purposes is a vertically scrolling shooter. It's very primitive, of course. You drive an off-road vehicle up a vertical road, which occasionally branches off in different directions. Your car is equipped with guns that fire either out in front or to each side of you. On the road you'll encounter other vehicles, including cars, motorbikes and helicopters. There are also hazards to avoid like landmines and boulders that roll into your path. The outrun style branching paths means that the Battle Road has 32 possible routes in all, so there is some replayability here. Each path has its own style of terrain, and each terrain has its unique enemy types. That's all there is to it really. Drive along shooting everything you can and try to avoid crashing or getting shot yourself. The music and sound effects are very 1984, but I actually find them quite charming. Nothing amazing here, but quite a nice little game for the era.
Irem released Blademaster on their M92 hardware in 1991. This was a side-scrolling beat-em-up or hack-and-slash game reminiscent of Sega's Golden Axe. Now, as someone who absolutely loves scrolling beat-em-ups, I always approach anything in the genre with high expectations, and it's not often I don't get any enjoyment at all out of them. So let's start with a few positives. Graphically, the game looks decent, the character sprites are well designed, and the detail in the backgrounds is fairly impressive. The music tends to suit the mood of the game most of the time. It doesn't bring the enjoyment down in any way, but don't expect it to last long in the memory. Now for some negatives. I found the most irritating thing was the repetition and the amount of hits certain enemies take before being defeated, especially later in the game. Rather than posing a challenge, it becomes frustrating, and the game goes from being enjoyable to being an unnecessary rigmarole. It's one of those games that is instantly forgettable. It doesn't have the character, style, or substance found in the better entries in the genre, and although it has its moments, Blademaster isn't one I'd recommend.
Cosmic Cop, known as Armed Police Unit Gallop in Japan, was a 1991 side-scrolling shooter. You might think it closely resembles the shooter that they're most famous for, R-Type, and you'd be right, as it's actually an entry in the R-Type series, but despite its similarities visually, it plays quite differently. You pilot an R-Type ship called the R-11B Peacemaker. It has a forward shooting gun as its main weapon, but there's also a targeting laser which automatically locks onto any 3 enemies on screen. The meter at the bottom of the screen marked laser indicates how long you can fire this for, and it needs to recharge before you can use it again. Power-ups can be collected for both weapons, and some power-ups give the ship secondary weapons like missiles and bombs. The more unique feature of Cosmic Cop is that it's a race against time. At the start of each level you're given a time to beat, i.e. the current record for that level. The closer you move your ship to the right as you blast your way through the levels, the faster the screen scrolls. Hang back to the left too much and the levels will take far longer to complete. Points are awarded for the speed in which levels are completed, so it's definitely one for arcade gamers who like chasing high scores. It's a reasonably forgiving shooter, but it doesn't do much to innovate, so the average side-scrolling shooter fan is best off sticking to the main R-Type series. The graphics and sound are okay, but the colour palette is quite bland and there's very little variety in the terms of level design and the look of the enemies, all feeling very metallic and industrial. And it's very short, having a mere 5 levels. I can see why this one never left the arcade. As I said, one for those who like to beat high scores or their previous best time, but if not, it's probably best to give Cosmic Cop a miss.
Superior Soldiers was a sci-fi themed one-on-one fighting game that was released in 1993 using Irem's M92G hardware. The game is set in 1999, after the majority of Earth's population has been wiped out by an energy force. The survivors take on new forms such as mutants and cyborgs as they prepare to battle. Let's begin with the characters. One of the most important features of any fighting game is the cast, and Superior Soldiers has a very forgettable one. Characters have your typical special attacks, fashioned after the ones found in plenty of other games in the genre. Fireballs, uppercuts and kicks are all here for you to make use of. Graphically, the game has some positive elements. Each of the characters, although fairly bland in design, are well presented with some decent animation at times. Sadly, the same can't be said for the backgrounds, which are incredibly dull and don't do anything to enhance the battle. Finally, we have the gameplay, and although the controls are fine and respond as you would expect, the difficulty in this one is infuriating to say the least. It's the cheapness of the enemies that causes the intense frustration in each round. I often found it difficult to defeat a single opponent after several attempts, and this completely destroyed my enjoyment of the game. In 1993, we already had Fatal Fury 2, The Art of Fighting, Mortal Kombat and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, so it would have been advisable to stay well clear of a Superior Soldiers cabinet.
Red Alert from 1981 is the earliest title on the list and the simplest. This is a fixed shooter, similar in style to arcade games like Galaga and Space Invaders. You control a turret at the bottom of the screen, which you can move horizontally, and you'll need to fire at any incoming enemy aircraft attacking the city. Each stage is set in a different country around the world, of which there are 6, each having some recognisable landmarks. For example, in England you can see Big Ben and Tower Bridge in the background, the Colosseum in Italy, and a New York skyline in the US, complete with the Statue of Liberty. It's your job to defend these cities from the bombs being dropped on them by the enemy aircraft. Each level begins with a cool little digitised voice sample saying,
"Red alert, enemy aircraft approaching, land."
And there are some other cool little bits of speech too. This was hugely impressive for 1981 and was apparently one of the earliest examples of digitised speech in a game. Each stage consists of 3 rounds, each having a time of day that it must be completed by. The clock at the top of the screen tracks the time of day. The first is jet fighters.
20 jet fighters approaching. Destroy all fighters by 1100 hours or MIR will be launched.
You can hear here that this phase must be completed by 11 AM, so you need to shoot down all the jets by that time. The jets fly back and forth across the screen, dropping bombs and occasionally dive bombing, and with each pass they fly closer to the ground and therefore your turret. Phase 2 is helicopters.
Helicopter squadron attacking. Destroy a helicopter by 1600 hours or MIR will be launched.
These fly much more erratically around the screen and drop bombs on little parachutes which must be shot before they hit the ground. The third round gets interesting.
Red alert, night attack by bombers.
Yes, night attack by bombers. The jets in this round are more separated out than the first round, but this phase takes place from 8 PM, so the sky is in total darkness. Your only light sources are these 2 searchlights, but if one of them gets destroyed by bombs, your field of view is greatly impaired. If you lose both, well, then you can't see a thing. Luckily, although you can no longer see the jets, you can see the bombs that they drop. If you fail to destroy all the enemy aircraft in any of these 3 phases, an MIRV is launched. This is a nuclear warhead that splits into 3 separate warheads when shot, which each then split into 3 again when they're shot individually. All the separated warheads will need to be destroyed before they reach the ground. Complete this round and it's on to the next city. Red Alert is a pretty fun twist on the fixed shooter format, and one that mostly gets overlooked due to its more well-known cousins.
Irem is probably best known for its R-Type series, so it was fairly surprising that R-Type Leo never made it to home consoles. This entry in the series arrived in 1992, 3 years after the incredible R-Type 2 was released. It is a time of peace between mankind and the Bido Empire. The humans have created an artificial planet which is maintained by a biocomputer. Unfortunately, this computer malfunctions and turns on its creators, and it's up to you to save the day. R-Type Leo introduced simultaneous 2-player action, and the power-up system associated with the series was changed. For better or worse, it was an interesting step by Irem. The Japanese version of the game retains the familiar checkpoints from previous games in the series, making it much harder than its worldwide release. After losing a life in the worldwide version, your ship respawns where it was destroyed. The presentation of R-Type Leo is stunning, with some incredible graphics and a fitting soundtrack. The level design increases the challenge of the game by adding plenty of stationary and moving obstacles. Dealing with these and the waves of enemies can be extremely daunting at times. Overall, R-Type Leo is an impressive entry in the genre and one that's definitely worth checking out. We received plenty of home conversions of R-Type games, and it's a real shame that this one never made its way onto a home console.
By far my favourite of Irem's arcade exclusive games is Ninja Baseball Batman, released in 1993. This game is just as wacky as its name. This is an insane side-scrolling beat-em-up that just oozes Japanese quirkiness with every level. Up to 4 players can team up in co-op from a selection of 4 available baseball players. You can see their stats at the top here to give you an idea of their strengths and weaknesses. Captain Jose in red, he's the all-rounder. Twin Bats Rhino in green, who unsurprisingly has 2 bats. He's fast but has weaker attacks. Beanball Roger in yellow, who is massive and has what looks like a giant baseball on a stick. He's slow and sluggish but very powerful. And Stick Straw in blue, who is again slow but powerful but has an extended bat that gives him added reach. Each character has their own moves. Controls are pretty simple with one button for attacks and one for jump, and the ability to perform a smart bomb attack at the cost of some health, as is common with arcade beat-em-ups. There are of course items to collect en route, like health replenishing food items and projectile weapons like baseballs and shuriken. At the end of each stage there's a boss to fight, which thankfully have health bars on the screen. I hate it when they don't have that. Sometimes after a level there'll be a little button bashing minigame, which are a bit of light relief between stages. They remind me of the Japanese minigame collections like Bishi Bashi. Despite it being quite a success in Japanese arcades, Ninja Baseball Batman sold a pitiful 43 arcade cabinets in North America. Perhaps this helps to explain why this never left the arcades. Even so, it's subsequently become a bit of a sleeper hit among arcade beat-em-up fans in the West via emulation. The music isn't much to write home about, it's just sort of there in the background and not particularly memorable, but there are so many sound effects popping off that you'll rarely even think about it. I absolutely love the art style, which has aged really well considering it's almost a 20-year-old game, with its chunky, gorgeously coloured sprites with bold black outlines that really make them stand out against the backgrounds. Ninja Baseball Batman's greatest asset is its enemy design. There are so many different enemy types, which is a welcome change for an early 90s beat-em-up, and they're just so wacky and well drawn. The bosses are huge and vibrantly coloured too. This is a real treat for arcade beat-em-up fans, and if I could recommend you check out only one game from this list on MAME, this would be it.
It's time to put on those shin pads and football boots as we take a look at Dream Soccer 94. I was a massive fan of arcade football or soccer games during the 80s and 90s, and loved entries in the series from the likes of Tecmo, Taito and SNK. So how did Irem do? You can choose from one of 8 international teams which each have their own individual star player, and you can choose from different formations before kickoff to suit your playing style. Graphically, the game is very similar to Taito's Football Champ and Power Goal games. The gameplay is smooth, and in typical arcade football fashion, overpowered special moves can be performed during matches, giving you a much higher chance of scoring a goal. The sound is decent, and I prefer Irem's choice to leave out background music during matches. Instead, there is crowd noise and even some commentary, which is a nice touch. It may not be as impressive as Taito Power Goal or Super Sidekicks, but Dream Soccer 94 was a solid entry in the arcade football genre.
So those were our picks for 9 of Irem's arcade exclusive games. Let us know in the comments which of them you've played and which you like, and what are your favourite Irem games in general. Thanks to Mega Dru for teaming up on this one, and be sure to check out his channel, which is linked at the end of the video and down below in the description. If you're a fan of arcade games, you'll love his channel. I'll see you again soon for another episode in the series, and as always, thanks for watching. You can find the other episodes in my arcade exclusive series in this playlist.